The morning of October 12, 1989, started like any other at the small Montana airport. The sun struggled to break through a thick blanket of fog that had settled over the tarmac, leaving the runway glistening with dew. Pilots were preparing for their flights. Ground crews were moving about with their usual routines, and the smell of jet fuel mixed with the crisp autumn air. Among them were Jack Reynolds and Henry Lawson, two seasoned pilots known for their calm professionalism. Today, however, something felt different. Witnesses would later say there was a tension about them. Subtle, almost imperceptible, but enough to make some of the airport staff glance twice. Jack was checking the plane's instruments for the third time, muttering under his breath about minor discrepancies. Henry paced near the hangar, occasionally looking up at the runway, as if he could see something no one else could. Their training flight was supposed to be routine, just a couple of loops over the nearby mountains to practice navigation and landing techniques. But something in the fog, something in the way the morning stretched endlessly in silence, gave the moment a strange weight. Even the birds were quiet, the usual chatter of sparrows and crows nowhere to be heard. As the twin-engine plane began taxiing toward the runway, airport staff noticed a sudden hush fall over the field. Engines roared, and the plane's lights cut through the dense fog, reflecting off the wet tarmac. Jack's hands were steady on the controls, but witnesses later recalled the unusual precision with which he moved, almost as if aware of some unseen observer. Henry signaled for clearance, their voices over the radio calm, professional, but something in the way Henry hesitated before the final transmission made one ground crew member shiver. The air felt charged, heavy, like the entire world was holding its breath. When the plane finally gained speed on the runway, it seemed to vanish into the fog. One moment the landing lights were cutting through the thick gray mist, and the next, they were gone. No sound of impact, no distress call, nothing. Just an emptiness that seemed to swallow the runway itself. People froze in place, their eyes scanning the horizon. Ground radar operators, who were tracking the plane, reported a sudden disappearance on their screens, as if the aircraft had been erased mid-flight. Calls went out frantically, but the fog made everything around them feel unreal, almost like a dream slipping out of focus. Locals and airport workers would later describe the scene with a mixture of awe and terror. Some swore the fog had thickened unnaturally, curling around the plane in spirals that seemed almost deliberate. Others reported a strange sensation, like an unseen force pressing down on them, making it hard to breathe. The runway, which moments ago had been alive with the hum of engines and movement, was suddenly still. Jack and Henry, two men with decades of flying experience, had vanished in a place they had known like the back of their hands. That morning, the Montana skies swallowed them whole, leaving behind only questions, whispered rumors, and the eerie silence of an airport haunted by the unknown. The moment Jack and Henry vanished, chaos erupted at the Montana airport. Ground crew and airport staff scrambled to radio control towers, pilots on standby rushed to assist, and emergency protocols were activated almost immediately. Within minutes, local law enforcement and search and rescue teams were on the move, combing the surrounding hills, dense forests, and rivers with flashlights and binoculars. Helicopters lifted off into the foggy morning, their searchlights cutting through the gray like blades, but even from above, nothing could be seen. It was as if the plane and its pilots had been swallowed by the very air itself. Families of the pilots were notified with trembling voices and teary eyes. Mary Reynolds, Jack's wife, felt her stomach drop as soon as the call came through. Henry's brother, Tom, rushed to the airport, his mind racing with every possible scenario. Volunteers from the local community joined in, forming human chains along trails, scanning the mountainside for the faintest sign of movement. Dogs trained to track scents were brought in, noses to the ground, ears twitching. But they too returned empty-handed, unable to pick up anything that could explain the sudden disappearance. As hours stretched into the afternoon, the search intensified. Drones and radar, rare technology for the time, were deployed to monitor the skies and the vast wilderness. Helicopter pilots reported an eerie sensation, a weight in the air, like the fog itself was resisting their search. There were fleeting moments when people thought they saw something. A shadow, a glimmer of metal, but each time, it vanished before anyone could confirm it. Every lead seemed to dissolve into the mist, leaving only frustration, fear, and the growing realization that this was no ordinary accident. Locals began whispering stories as news spread through Montana. Ranchers reported strange lights flickering in the woods the night before the disappearance. Campers claimed to have seen the plane hovering low, engine silent, before vanishing. Even experienced pilots who had flown hundreds of hours described a sense of unease in the air. A feeling that something unseen was watching, waiting. These anecdotes spread quickly, painting the event with a layer of supernatural mystery, though authorities remained cautious, insisting that only facts mattered. As night fell, the search continued with a haunting intensity. Spotlights scanned tree lines, the hum of engines breaking the heavy silence. Yet, every trail ended abruptly, every signal faded into nothingness. Families waited in tense uncertainty, volunteers refused to leave, and radar operators stared at blank screens, unable to reconcile reality with the evidence, or lack of it. By the end of the first day, it became painfully clear. Jack and Henry were gone without a trace, and the Montana wilderness had become a cage of unanswered questions, holding its secrets tightly in the fog. As days turned into weeks after the disappearance, speculation about Jack and Henry grew uncontrollably. Airport staff, locals, and even the pilots' families were desperate for answers. But every explanation seemed to fall short. Initially, authorities suggested pilot error, a misjudgment in the fog, a sudden mechanical failure. But those who knew Jack and Henry insisted it was impossible. Both were highly experienced, meticulous, and cautious in the air. The idea that two skilled pilots could vanish without a single distress call or trace of their aircraft seemed beyond comprehension. Soon, rumors began to spread like wildfire. Some believed the plane had been sucked into a sudden freak storm, an uncharted microburst that appeared out of nowhere and swallowed the aircraft. Others whispered about mountain turbulence or secret military activity in the area. Local conspiracy theorists grew bolder, claiming the pilots had stumbled upon something they weren't supposed to see, or that the government had hidden them for unknown reasons. Flyers appeared overnight, hand-drawn maps marked with symbols, coordinates, and warnings, all pointing to a deeper mystery in the Montana wilderness. Even the families couldn't escape the swirling theories. Mary Reynolds received letters from strangers claiming to know where Jack was, or insisting he had been taken by some unexplained phenomenon. Henry's brother Tom spent sleepless nights poring over old flight logs and airport schematics, convinced the airport itself held secrets that had never been revealed. He mapped every hangar, runway, and storage room, looking for anything that could explain the sudden disappearance. But every path he followed seemed to lead to more questions rather than answers, leaving him more obsessed and more haunted than ever. By the end of the first month, the story had spread beyond Montana. Aviation magazines and newspapers picked it up as one of the strangest disappearances in U.S. history. Experts debated it on radio shows and at pilot conferences. Some argued that the pilot's vanishing defied physics, while others claimed it was just another sad tale of misfortune. But even the experts could not dismiss the eyewitness accounts of unnatural fog, eerie silence, and unexplained lights in the sky. Each theory only seemed to deepen the mystery, making the truth feel farther away than ever. As the years passed, Jack and Henry's disappearance became a ghost story, whispered among pilots and airport staff. The foggy morning of October 12th was replayed endlessly in memories, each retelling adding another layer of suspense. People avoided the runway where it happened, and new pilots joined the airport staff with a cautious respect for the skies over Montana. Even decades later, the question remained: did the pilots fall victim to a freak accident, or had something, or someone, intervened, hiding them where no one could ever find them? For Jack's wife, Mary Reynolds, the disappearance was more than a mystery. It was a wound that never healed. In the weeks following that foggy October morning, she replayed every moment she had spent with Jack, searching for signs she might have missed. Every voicemail, every written note, every casual "I'll see you tonight" weighed on her mind. Friends tried to comfort her, but nothing could bridge the gap left by Jack's sudden vanishing. Her days became consumed with the need to understand. Her nights, filled with restless dreams of the Montana runway, the thick fog, and Jack's calm face as he took off into the unknown. Henry's family faced a similar torment. His younger brother, Tom Lawson, had always looked up to Henry as both a mentor and a friend. After the disappearance, Tom found himself diving headfirst into research, airport logs, flight patterns, and every scrap of information that might provide a clue. His obsession grew with every dead end, turning into a relentless hunt that consumed his waking hours. Tom would retrace Henry's last known steps, talk to airport staff repeatedly, and even hire private investigators to comb the area. Each lead brought a flicker of hope, quickly replaced by frustration when it proved fruitless, leaving him emotionally drained and haunted by what might have been. The disappearance also cast a long shadow over the small Montana community. Airport employees, once comfortable in their routines, began to view every takeoff and landing with suspicion and fear. Some pilots refused to fly near the runway, where Jack and Henry had vanished, sharing hushed warnings about the fog that swallowed planes whole. Longtime locals spoke of a quiet unease that settled over the airport after that day, as if the land itself remembered the event. Even newcomers could feel it. A tension in the air, an almost imperceptible whisper that the skies were not always safe. Mary and Tom became linked in an unspoken bond of shared loss. Though they never met often in those early years, they found themselves connecting through letters, phone calls, and occasional in-person meetings. Each conversation was tinged with grief, but also a determination to uncover the truth. They shared rumors, eyewitness accounts, and theories, trying to make sense of something that seemed beyond understanding. In a strange way, the disappearance had transformed their lives, reshaping their daily existence around the need to find closure that never came. Over the years, the search for answers became more than a quest. It became a defining part of their identities. Mary's hope, once fragile, hardened into determination. Tom's obsession transformed into relentless scrutiny of every detail, every report, every unexplained story linked to the foggy morning. Both carried a quiet, heavy burden, the kind that left invisible scars on the heart. The lives they once knew, filled with laughter, work, and simple routines, had been replaced by a world defined by absence, mystery, and the lingering question that refused to fade: where had Jack and Henry gone? And why? It wasn't until 35 years later that the Montana airport finally revealed its secret. The small facility, long considered quiet and unremarkable, had begun renovations to modernize its hangars and repair long-neglected infrastructure. As workers tore into a wall of an old hangar, a chill ran through the crew. Beneath layers of dust, insulation, and cracked bricks, they uncovered a hidden cavity. At first, it looked like a simple storage space, but then, the unmistakable outline of a twin-engine aircraft appeared. Time had preserved the plane almost perfectly, as if it had been intentionally hidden, rather than left to decay in the elements. Word of the discovery spread like wildfire. Investigators, airport authorities, and historians arrived on site within hours, drawn by the promise of solving a decades-old mystery. The plane sat untouched in the small chamber, the lights of their flashlights glinting off polished metal and glass that seemed impossible after so many years. It was surreal, something out of a dream or a nightmare. As they approached, a deeper shock awaited them. Inside the cockpit were Jack and Henry, seated as if the flight had never ended, frozen in time. Their expressions were calm, their hands on the controls, and yet their presence was eerily unnatural, sending a shiver down every spine present. Mary Reynolds and Tom Lawson were called immediately, their hands shaking as they were guided through the hangar. For decades, they had imagined this moment in countless ways, but nothing prepared them for the reality of seeing the men they had lost so long ago. They studied the faces of their loved ones, searching for a flicker of recognition, a hint that the pilots were aware of their families' grief. But there was nothing. The room felt suffocating, a mixture of awe and fear. It was impossible to explain why Jack and Henry appeared untouched by time. Yet the weight of decades had hung over everyone else like a dark cloud. Investigators pored over the plane meticulously. Every switch, every gauge, and every instrument told a story of routine flight. Nothing extraordinary. No distress signals, no signs of malfunction, no struggle of any kind. Even the personal effects, letters, and notebooks tucked inside the cockpit were preserved, as though carefully stored for someone to discover in the future. The initial analysis suggested deliberate concealment rather than accident. Questions raced through the minds of the authorities and families. Who could have hidden the plane, and why? How could such a secret remain undisturbed for over 3 decades in a facility that had been in constant use? The chamber itself raised more questions than it answered. The walls, now partially removed, revealed strange markings etched into the concrete, cryptic symbols, scratches, and patterns that no one could immediately decipher. Some speculated they were warnings, others, an attempt at ritualistic concealment. The plane's discovery was like opening a door into another reality, one where human logic seemed insufficient to explain what had happened. Every detail, from the precise placement of the aircraft to the mysterious markings, hinted at a level of planning and intent that had remained hidden from the world for 35 long years. As investigators delved deeper into the hidden chamber, it became clear that the mystery went far beyond the mere concealment of the plane. The walls surrounding the aircraft were covered in strange, cryptic symbols that seemed deliberately carved over decades. Some were geometric, others resembled letters or numbers, but nothing made immediate sense. Experts in linguistics, cryptography, and even local historians were called in, each trying to decode a pattern, a message, or a warning. The more they studied, the more unsettling the entire scene became. It was as though the markings were meant to communicate something that transcended normal human understanding. Alongside the symbols, investigators discovered small, almost imperceptible modifications to the chamber. Certain bricks had been carefully replaced, gaps filled with a black substance that resisted modern chemical analysis, and tiny scratches ran along the floor as if something, or someone, had moved deliberately within the confined space. Even the placement of the plane was precise, positioned so that it fit perfectly against the surrounding walls. The investigators couldn't shake the feeling that the room itself was a puzzle, a carefully orchestrated design meant to hide not just the aircraft, but a secret that had been protected for decades. Personal items belonging to Jack and Henry added another layer of mystery. A few notebooks and letters were tucked into hidden compartments inside the cockpit, each one intact and meticulously preserved. Some entries reflected routine observations about flight patterns or weather conditions, but others hinted at unease. Strange sightings during previous flights, and fleeting moments of fear that Jack and Henry had never shared with anyone. These writings suggested they may have been aware of something unusual at the Montana airport long before their disappearance. A foreboding sense that something watched them, something that might eventually lead them to this very chamber. Even the smallest details unnerved those involved in the investigation. Footprints, or what appeared to be them, were pressed into the concrete, but they led nowhere, disappearing as if swallowed by the walls themselves. Dust patterns and scratches indicated repeated human, or possibly non-human, movement, yet no one could identify who or what had created them. Every step taken within the chamber heightened the sense that this wasn't just a place where the plane had been hidden. It was a deliberate trap or sanctuary, carefully orchestrated by someone with intimate knowledge of the pilots, the airport, and the secrets that lay buried beneath layers of concrete and insulation. Perhaps most unsettling were the small carvings on the plane's fuselage itself. At first, they appeared to be accidental scratches, but under closer examination, it became clear they were deliberate symbols, matching those on the surrounding walls. Investigators theorized that these markings could be a form of communication, left intentionally to tell someone, or something, the truth about what had occurred. Every new clue seemed to deepen the mystery, revealing a level of planning and secrecy that spanned decades, leaving the authorities, historians, and the pilots' families grappling with a chilling question: if someone had hidden Jack and Henry so meticulously, who or what was capable of orchestrating such a feat? As the investigation reached its peak, a disturbing realization began to take hold: Jack and Henry's disappearance was no accident. The plane, the chamber, and the cryptic markings all pointed to a level of deliberate planning that defied explanation. Experts in aviation, architecture, and even law enforcement examined the evidence repeatedly, each time returning with the same unnerving conclusion. The pilots had been deliberately concealed, and the Montana airport itself had been used as the hiding place. Every detail, from the exact position of the plane to the mysterious symbols etched in concrete, suggested intention, precision, and secrecy. The pilots themselves presented an equally baffling mystery. Jack and Henry were perfectly preserved, seated at the controls as if frozen in a moment from 1989. Their calm expressions contrasted sharply with the chaos surrounding their disappearance, leaving the families and investigators with more questions than answers. Theories emerged about suspended animation, unknown technologies, or some unknown force at work, but none could fully account for their condition. Mary Reynolds and Tom Lawson were haunted by the sight Hope mingled with disbelief, grief interlaced with awe, as they tried to reconcile decades of absence with the eerie presence before them. Authorities began piecing together the construction of the hidden chamber. Records suggested that decades ago, someone with deep knowledge of the airport had built the wall and sealed it carefully, creating a perfectly hidden space. No contractors, no workers, and no official records indicated when or why the construction occurred. It was as though the entire act had been planned in secret, anticipating that one day the plane and its occupants would be discovered, but leaving behind no clues for anyone until that moment. The sheer audacity of it, coupled with the meticulous execution, made it clear that this was not the act of ordinary criminals or even ordinary humans. It was something far more calculated. The cryptic symbols scattered throughout the chamber became the focal point of analysis. Linguists and cryptographers theorized that they could represent warnings, directions, or messages meant for those who would eventually find the plane. Some symbols appeared to reference time, others flight paths, and a few even seemed to mimic human faces, frozen in silent screams. The deeper investigators delved, the more they realized that the symbols were not random. They formed a narrative, a hidden story of what had occurred that morning in 1989. Each mark added weight to the idea that the pilots' disappearance had been carefully orchestrated, their fates entwined with secrets someone, or something, had wanted to preserve for decades. The families struggled to reconcile the revelation with the lives they had lived without Jack and Henry. For Mary and Tom, the discovery brought a mixture of closure and unease. On one hand, they finally knew where the pilots had been all those years, and that they had not been lost to the wilderness. On the other, the sheer meticulousness of the concealment, combined with the cryptic symbols and the pilots' unnatural preservation, left a lingering horror that refused to fade. It became increasingly clear that the Montana airport, ordinary to most, held a dark, hidden history, and that Jack and Henry's vanishing was just the surface of something far more profound, mysterious, and terrifying than anyone had imagined. As the plane was carefully removed from its hidden chamber, experts and families alike realized that the Montana airport had quietly held a secret for 35 years, one that defied explanation. Jack and Henry were finally accounted for, but their preserved state, the cryptic symbols, and the meticulous concealment hinted at forces beyond ordinary understanding. The airport, a place of routine and everyday work, had become the epicenter of a decades-long mystery that no one could have anticipated. Mary Reynolds and Tom Lawson stood silently in the hangar, their emotions a mix of relief, grief, and awe. Seeing their loved ones again was overwhelming. Yet there was no joy in the discovery, only the heavy weight of decades, lost in questions that might never be answered. Who had hidden the plane? Why were the pilots preserved in such an unnatural way? And what did the symbols truly mean? Even as authorities cataloged every detail, these questions lingered, unanswered and haunting. Word of the discovery spread quickly, and the story captured the imagination of people across the country. Historians, aviation experts, and journalists flocked to Montana, drawn by the enigma of two men frozen in time and the airport wall that had concealed them. The investigation revealed a level of planning so precise it seemed almost supernatural. Every piece of evidence, from the cryptic markings to the perfectly preserved plane, added layers of suspense and mystery, leaving the world both fascinated and unnerved. Though the physical mystery had been solved, the location of the plane and the pilots revealed, the emotional and psychological impact endured. Families had closure, but it was bittersweet. Jack and Henry, were back in the world of the living in a sense, but they had been lost to time in a way that nothing could truly restore. The story of that foggy Montana morning in 1989 had become legend, whispered among pilots, airport staff, and locals as a chilling reminder of how fragile human perception can be in the face of the unexplained. In the end, the Montana airport wall became more than just a barrier of brick and mortar. It became a symbol of a secret that had waited patiently for decades to be revealed. It reminded everyone that some mysteries are bigger than time, beyond explanation, and that the truth, no matter how carefully hidden, always has a way of coming to light. And for Mary, Tom, and all who had waited so long, that truth was both a revelation and a haunting. Proof that some answers come at a price, and some secrets are never meant to be fully understood.
If you liked this video, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Most importantly, subscribe and hit the bell icon so the next secret finds you first.